Casey Anthony's parents sat down for a lie detector test to face some of the most difficult questions, although I felt like they could have asked a few more that weren't in there, but regardless, we're going to talk about all of it in today's video. Y'all, 2024 is here, and Roscoe and I have been on our new health routines, and we started them last year, and we're going all the way through this year with them. Now, you know, Roscoe and I, we've been doing this together. We'll get out in the yard, we'll walk around, we'll do our thing. Okay, well, maybe I do all the walking and he gets carried. I mean, it is what it is. He is a senior dog. So if you followed me, you know Roscoe has been using Sundays for months now. It is his new staple. It is his go-to for food. Now, also if you follow me, or if you don't, then you'll know, or now you know, Roscoe, he really truly is a senior dog. He's 15 years old, and so his diet is all over the place. There are days where it's like, what will you eat today? But overall, Sundays has been a life changer around here. So Roscoe also doesn't have any teeth, and the texture of the food is absolutely perfect for him. So the food that I leave out in his little bowls, he has little stations around the house so that I know, okay, he's gonna eat. If he's going through like a picky eating phase, it has become his go-to. It's made everything so much easier and taken such a weight off of my shoulders of literally multiple times a day being like, what can we get him to eat? What can we get him to eat? Because I know he at least goes to his Sundays as his staple. So if you're not familiar with Sundays, or if you or your pet, I should say, hasn't tried it, let's talk about what exactly it is for a minute. So first and foremost, Sundays makes a super cool box. Look at how cute this is, y'all. This actually became a topic of conversation at some of my Christmas stuff over here because people saw it sitting out, and it has all the stuff here. It has a little cartoon on the bottom. It has a crossword puzzle. I love this every time, y'all. But everybody absolutely, my family stuff absolutely loved how they did their packaging. And then it lists all the ingredients here so that you know exactly what's going into your animal, your dog, your family. So there's no prep, there's no mess with the food. It's air dried, it's ready to go. And see the nice little resealable bag that it has. And see, that's that texture that I'm talking about right there. That's so perfect for Roscoe. You see how it just comes off like that? And then obviously a dog who's younger or whatever, you know, isn't in their senior days with no teeth is going to have a very easy time going through this. And I mean, to be honest, it smells good. And again, as I always like to go over, the ingredients are things that we know. Fish oil, sunflower oil, zucchini, kale, flaxseed, sea salt. I mean, you name it. This is like healthy stuff that I'm like, look, I might put that in a salad for myself when I'm on a health binge. Now, also, you've probably seen Roscoe's little cousins, his little friends come over and visit. And let me tell you what, when they come over, I literally had to get one of these things right here, y'all. One of those dishes like this to make them slow down on it because they will rip through this. I have to really ration out where I put the Sundays because, like I said, I have little stations for Roscoe around the house, and he obviously doesn't need this right here. But the younger pups, they'll eat me out of house and home, okay? It's become a staple for literally everyone that I know and their dogs. And the company has been great to work with. The people just seem so absolutely nice and chill, which is something that I look for because I feel like those are dog people. They get me, you know what I'm saying? And now, of course, in addition to being cool people making a cool product, they're hooking the Sofa Squad up, okay? If you use code SOFA, you're gonna get 50% off of your first order. Okay, that is amazing. And that is such a good deal because trust me, especially if you have small dogs like Roscoe, y'all, this is gonna last, okay? So it's one of those things where you have to give it a try. Roscoe absolutely loves it. Every dog that I have encountered absolutely loves it. I keep telling people, in addition to like just making it a healthy all-around food, if you've got a senior dog, if you have a picky eater, any of those things, this is like a must try, okay? Give it a shot and see what you think. Now again, use code SOFA. You're gonna get 50% off of your first order. Hello, Sofa Squad, and welcome back to the, well, sofa. It's back there. Roscoe's on it. My name's Paul. I'm sitting in front of it. What we're gonna be doing today is reviewing the documentary that just came out. It was on Casey Anthony's parents. Like I said in the intro, they took a lie detector test. Now what we'll do is we'll begin the video with a quick little overview for those who might not have followed the case and just kind of talk about what's gone on recently and to the reasons why her parents even sat down and did this. And then we're going to go just over notes that I took. If you watch my Natalia Grace video, this is very similar. I literally watched the documentary and made notes throughout. So I'm going to be reading the notes and then kind of offering my commentary, like what it jogged in my mind. So this is more of like a podcasty kind of episode, definite commentary, like I'm heavy on the commentary type of vibe. So just know that that's not your speed. I get it. I understand. Okay, Roscoe does too. Now, before we do get in there, into the video, into the discussion, if you want to follow me on, well, the Insta, on the grams, on the Instagrams, it's on the screen, it's in the description. Roscoe and I, we're fancy over there, okay? We do things like take pictures of food and, you know, filtered pictures out in like fall-like settings, okay? It's basically what Instagram's all about, okay? So anyways, we're over there if you want to follow us. Now, anyways, let's get into that 60-second overview. So July 15th, 2008, 2-year-old Kaylee Anthony, the daughter of Casey Anthony, was reported missing by Casey's mother. She said she hadn't seen her in a month. A massive search begins, but the person at the center of it, Casey Anthony, she didn't seem that concerned and would claim that the nanny essentially took her and that Casey, she herself, was trying to handle the situation privately and, you know, find her on her own. Well, searches into cell phones, computers, cars, that didn't help Casey's case at all. By October 2008, Casey was officially charged with first-degree M charges, and only 2 months later, little Kaylee's remains were found in the woods less than a mile from the Anthony's home. However, when Casey finally made it to trial, she was found not guilty on the M charges. She was found guilty of lying to police and whatnot. Now, she has remained kind of out of the spotlight as much as she could until recently. In 2022, a Peacock documentary by the name Casey Anthony, Where the Truth Lies came out. In this, Casey basically points the finger at her father and blames all of her traumas and demons on him, as well as what happened to Kaylee. Now, it was jaw-dropping, it was shocking, and also incredibly cringy, as most of the information, at least for me, was very clearly deceptive. So fast forward to now. Her parents, George and Cindy Anthony, they sit down with A&E for a lie detector test. And it was done on the show named Casey Anthony's Parents, The Lie Detector Test. Now, they would allegedly, for the first time, watch Casey's allegations in her latest documentary. And then each of them would take a lie detector test while being questioned about, well, some hard-hitting questions. Now, that's the little overview. As you always know, there's way more to this case than that, right? But that just gets everybody on the same page, gives us some context as to why we have arrived at this video today. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be reading from my phone, so excuse me if I'm looking down and whatnot, and we're just going to go through and talk about these notes that I made and talk about the case in general. So let's go. So parents are wanting to set the record straight on all the stuff Casey said during her show, Where the Truth Lies. Reviews past case in court about how her attorney threw him under the bus. It says the parents have not watched Casey's documentary. So this is basically just what we already talked about, right? This is why they've come out. They want to do this. You know, that allegedly they never watched it, and I tend to believe that, right? Because I'm sure these people's lives, it's like there's stuff coming out all the time that they can't watch it all. They can't, you know what I'm saying? They have to just kind of be like, what now? Well, this caused enough of a rumble. I mean, they were playing voicemails and stuff like that of like people calling up like death threats on George, calling him PEDO, that word, like going off and everything. So now we'll get to my thoughts overall on all the people in this family at the very end of the video. I'll probably spread them throughout, but we'll get to that, okay? So just please hold on that. Let's continue. So it says parents have a shrine to Kaylee. It's very sad. George said he's seen Kaylee in the house twice since she passed. So yes, they have, like, Kaylee is everywhere in that home. And at the center of this case, that is what is heartbreaking. It gives me goosebumps right now, because anytime a small child like this, you know, that level of innocence that's stolen from the world, and especially those of you who had children, grandchildren, you know, whatever, you know what I'm saying? It's absolutely heartbreaking to think of what happened to her and where she ended up, and then what it did to this family. I mean, you can tell that George and Cindy genuinely love this little baby, right? Way more than Casey ever could have, in my opinion. And so that part just really brought it home as to what this was all about. Okay, let's continue. 2018, George had an accident, and they talk about the accident that he had and kind of what it did, you know, to his mental and physical health and whatnot. Why haven't you watched the allegations? Mom says Casey told her she was never going to exploit Kaylee's name, so they didn't watch, but people came from the woodwork to attack them. And this is what I was referring to earlier. You know, the mother was like, Casey promised her she would never exploit her daughter's name, for money or fame or infamy, whatever. And I mean, this clearly, when Casey did this, I mean, in my opinion, it was like she needed money and either or to throw her parents under the bus to try and clear her name. And who knows, right? But it definitely was exploitive. And I'm referring to Casey's documentary. And like I said, they played some of these voicemails and stuff. And you're like, oh my God, can you imagine living through all that, and then like just years later you're still getting harassed by the general public because Casey Anthony came out with a documentary and said a bunch of stuff about her dad. It's insane to me. Now, next thing, Dad says Casey lies about everything. Well, hell, I could have told you that. George said he never did anything wrong. He says the polygraph will show he did everything he could to prove that he did not hurt his daughter or his granddaughter. The mother says she wants to just show everybody what the truth is and that they're going to get the truth out once and for all. Now, George will be the center of this, in my opinion, because a lot of this is about the allegations against him, what Casey is saying he did. She has leveraged some major allegations against him since she was in court. This has been her whole thing. Well, now to completely blame what happened to Kaylee on her dad, like 100%, like he did it, because of XYZ, I mean, this is next level, right? And, Cindy's like, look, we just want the truth out there. We want to set the record straight, this, that, and the other. So, okay, when he asked what happens if y'all don't pass, and George is like, I need to leave the room. So George is a very emotional man. Just a very emotional man. He gets upset. Again, I personally don't know how I could have lived through what they lived through and make it to the other side, so I get some things are going to upset him. And like that whole thought right there of like, if you don't pass this, I mean, here's the thing. You're doing a lie detector test talking about, did you touch your daughter and granddaughter? Did you take your granddaughter's life, right? I mean, this is a scary proposition to think, what if I don't pass? Because remember, lie detector test, this is very gimmicky, right? They're not gonna, this isn't a courtroom thing. This is, just weed them out a little bit. This is stuff we see on talk shows and whatnot. So they're not the most reliable thing is what I'm getting at. So, I mean, of course, I feel for him. I was nervous for him in that because this is my thought process with a lie detector test. I'm like, what if you're like, but I'm nervous over being nervous. So what if that triggers it? Almost like this, like, when you leave the grocery store and you're at self-checkout and you feel like you're a criminal, even though you've done nothing wrong, but it's just like you feel like, well, I need to make sure I do this or that. You know what I'm saying? So like that's my thought process with the lie detector test. The producer says they have a really good examiner. This is that they want to test him before he listens to Casey's allegations to avoid the emotional stuff. He'll be asked 2 sets of questions, one relating to the S abuse. The second group of questions will be addressed whether he was involved in Kaylee's disappearance in any way. So they're like, we have a really good, person to sit here and do this. And they're doing these 2 sets of questions. Now we'll get to those here in a minute. But those are the 2 lines of questioning. Now they say for Cindy, they're going to ask her if George ever told her anything at all about his involvement with Kaylee's disappearance. And here's some of my interjection because I even wrote this down. My first thought was ask her about the chloroform search. Here's my thing, just spoiler alert, okay? They toss Cindy very easy, underhanded, everybody move in on the bases, kind of a pitch, right? I am sure whether it was lawyers or Cindy herself, because you can tell she is very well versed in doing these things, not lie detector tests, but dealing with producers and shows and stuff, like she's running the show kind of a thing. And we'll get to in a moment what took place and you can kind of see some of her behavior. But for her, I'm like, can we ask about the chloroform? Can we ask about this? Can we ask about that? But remember, she said a lot of this stuff in the stand, so she's not going to want to, come back and say something. But 100%, they absolutely did not ask her the questions that I would have wanted to ask her. Because here's my thing. If you're going to be like, hey, did George ever tell you about, doing this to Kaylee? Yeah. We're going to do this on a reality TV show now. All these years later. Yep, you're right. You got me. He told me. I mean, come on, right? Like, of course he didn't. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's a no-brainer. Now, again, for us to know that, but more or less for me, I would have been like, did Casey tell you? Because we'll also get to some text messages in a minute that kind of give us an inkling as to what she really thinks about it, meaning Cindy. So let's keep going. They go back in time, and Cindy talks about developing PTSD. When asked how they are as a couple, they have good and bad days. She says they weren't on the same page during the moment, but they made it through. And that's the thing. One thing I will have to say is watching them is, especially in this day and age, when you see couples that have been together a long time or survived a relationship through something incredibly tumultuous, my hat's off to them. I cannot imagine being in a relationship where your child pulls the thing that Casey Anthony did and does all the stuff since then that she has done, right? And also, especially because we'll get into this, where remember, George thinks one thing about what happened and Cindy kind of thinks another. They're not 100% on the same page with that, but probably more so than they have been in the past. So my hat is off to them for getting through this, their marriage getting through this and sticking through it, right? Because it's kind of unheard of today. So let's keep going. FBI polygraph man says this will tell us if you had something to do with this. This part feels very TV reality show. He's saying clickbaity stuff. Yeah, so they sit down with the dude who's going to do the thing. And this is where it just feels like, clickbaity, like, this is going to tell us if you've ever hidden anything, George. You know what I mean? Like that kind of vibe. And you're just like, just get it on, okay? Look, we're all adults here in the room, I think, okay? We can just get to the polygraph test. We don't need the drama, but I get it. And then I said, even I was nervous watching. That's what I'm talking about. The whole thing, like when you're walking out of the store self-checkout and you're like, I feel like I did something wrong. I mean, they had me shaking over here. Because I'm literally like you can't trust the results of these things, right? And so even keep that in mind when we get the results, right? You can't really trust these things. So, y'all, okay, this is not, y'all, when he asked this question, I was like, this has been a complete setup by Cindy to find out if he's got a side chick, okay? One of the first questions they asked, and I said this right here, I said, damn, he slid in right off the bat. Have you ever cheated on Cindy? George was like, hold on now. We're not here to talk about all that. So that one took me out of left field. I know it did, George. Okay, so I was like, I bet she told him to ask that. Cindy's like, when we separated, he wanted to date, so he's lying. Okay, so here's the thing. They're like, even emotionally, and they're like, where do you rate yourself on like I forget what the word was. I didn't write it down, but it was like on a scale of 1 to 10 of like, almost like, relationship honesty or whatever. And he's like, a 10, completely honest, I've never had the thought to go with anybody else, that kind of thing. And that's when she's like, oh no. When we separated, he wanted to start dating, so he's not being truthful, because they said even an emotional affair, and I was like, that's where they're gonna get him. That's where they're gonna get him. So to me, it was so funny to go right in with that. I was like, dang, they are. You know what I'm saying? Like, but he did say, we're going to ask 2 sets of questions, and some of them are done in the context to see if you are lying specifically about that, or if you're the type person who would entertain doing something like that. So if they're going to start right off the bat, like, did you cheat on Cindy? Well, if he fails that, it's like you're the type to be deceitful in that way. That could lead in. I mean, that's a far jump from that to, I did all this stuff Casey said, right? But you see where I'm going with this. Okay, let's keep going. After they take the test, they show them Casey's allegations. George gets kind of upset, and Cindy tries to help him, and she's like, look, okay, now this is going to be kind of tricky here. She's like, look, can we move the furniture around so he's maybe facing this way? And the producer's like, well, it works really well this way. And she gets pissed, okay? And she's like, I'm not getting any assistance. I'm trying to help him. If he messes up, he can go to jail. And basically, she's walking around and this is where I'm like, you can tell she's very used to how to deal with TV people and producers and telling them what she wants and this, that, and the other, because she gets pissy over this, and she's just like, look, this is what you need to do, and da-da-da-da, and it gives you this insight into how probably the house is, like when there's no cameras around, and like, how she's probably, kind of in charge, and to take charge, like, bam, this is how it's going to go. Because again, he's getting upset, and then she's like, well, we're going to do this, we're going to turn this over, we're going to do that, and if y'all aren't doing it, I'm going to let you know. Now, also, she's probably annoyed, too, because if you've dealt with this kind of like tabloidish TV type situations and people your whole life because of something your daughter did, it's just going to get old at a certain point, right? Even if there is authenticity in the reasons why they did the show, it's just going to get annoying, right? So, yeah, that part was interesting to me. Now, a producer tells them to brace themselves, then shows the part where Casey Anthony says her nightmare was dad R-ing her over and over and how she can't tell mommy. So they go back to Casey Anthony's documentary and show, I'm talking probably one of the worst scenes they could, right, in my opinion, where she was like, I had a nightmare last night. And her producer's like, what was it? She's like, it was my dad. And he was R-ing me over and over. And you could tell, that was one of the parts I was like, she is lying. This is just performative. Oh my God. And he's like, and I couldn't tell mommy. And I'm like, literally thinking as a parent, watching your child say that about you. And I'm like, oh I mean, you feel the weight in your stomach for them, right? Just on top of it all, taking their granddaughter from them. And then, I mean, it gave me goosebumps again. And then, what, 10 years, wherever right now, however long, 20 years, this kind of stuff and just the vileness of it. So that part really hit hard for me. Now, Cindy comes right back and she's like, she never called me mommy. And George is sitting there like, whoa. And George says, we did everything for her. How did this happen? And that was such a heavy moment too, because when you sit here and look at the true crime cases that we watch and things of that nature, whether it be, a parent stuck between, this is my son, but he's now being sentenced for these horrible crimes that he did, but it's my child, or vice versa, whatever, right? And so George just say this like, and they're showing home videos when they were growing up of Christmas with Casey and when she was a kid. And you're like, yeah, what happened? You know what I mean? How does one arrive at this? Blows my mind. Now they start talking about, the pragmatics of if this was going on, this is how the house is set up, right? And Cindy says it's about 30 feet from their bedroom to hers, and they always slept with doors open. She says she would have castrated George herself. And George says that's not the daughter he raised, talking about Casey Anthony. And so that's what, Cindy's talking about, the house, the doors are open, we would hear everything, like, this is just, it's not feasible. Now, again, if something like this was going on, I mean, I see what Cindy's saying, but if somebody was truly doing something like this, they're going to find a way if they wanted to, you know what I mean? But again, I'm not believing what Casey Anthony has to say. Now they get to the questions about the SA with Casey. And again, they're talking to George. When asked if he had any S contact with her, immediately he says no. They ask him the same question in all different sorts of ways. Then the producer asks Cindy what she thinks about his body language. So Cindy's like in another room watching, and she's basically like, huh? They keep asking him all these same questions in a different way. So she's doing that, and of course, I mean, you're tied up to this thing, right? So you're sitting here, yes, no. And George is visibly nervous, right? I mean, he's just, getting all up in it. They show them the scene where Casey is rewatching George's speech at the funeral. And he's saying the thing about smelling Kaylee's hair and the sweet sweat and those kind of comments. And the thing about smelling her hair and kinds of things that could be misconstrued as creepy. And Cindy's like, I see where she's going with this. So now, one reason we're kind of jumping back and forth because literally I'm just writing notes as the show goes on. So one scene they'll be questioning him, then they'll jump back to them watching more of the thing on the couch and whatnot. Yeah, but this part right here where they go back to that speech, and yes, I mean, I guess when you look at it through this lens of like smelling her sweet sweat, and her hair and this and that, I mean, it's kind of like, okay, that's different or whatever. Well, then Cindy, the mother, is like, I see. To me, hearing Cindy's reaction of like this naive, like, oh, I see where she's going with that. I can see it now, how she's painting that was more authentic than what Casey did, or Casey is doing, if that makes sense. I just tend to believe that, where she's like, okay, wait, Casey is taking this benign thing and making it XYZ. The producer asked him about those questions, specifically the sweat and smelling Kaylee's hair. And he's like, it was my granddaughter. I just felt that in my heart, so I said it. I mean, what am I to say? Producer says he wants to dig into things a little bit more, so he takes George out to the patio. So this is where he's wanted to really dig into this more. And the dude interviewing them, it gets a little dramatic, because he tries to ham it up like, why would you say this? Why? We need to really dig into this. Let's go outside alone. They're on the patio. Yes, there's a kernel of truth to any of the allegations. George says none. Okay, so the producer's out there. He's like, what is the kernel of truth in these things she's saying? What part is true? What part is this? And he'll ask this at various intervals. And on this stuff, with the allegations of doing the essay to her, he's like, there is none. There was nothing. I did not do anything to my daughter or granddaughter. Like zero, zilch, nada, okay? Now, at one point, George says, I know where I'm going when I die, and I don't think my daughter's going to the same place. Which is pretty powerful to me. Now, Cindy goes in for her pre-test. So they do like this pre-test questioning when you're hooked up, and then they do the thing. Now, during this questioning, he's asking about medications, things like that. So she goes back to the time of where she had PSD, and she says there was one point where she got something happened with her and Casey. Casey was trying to leave, whatever. So she gets Casey on the floor and sits on her, but didn't hurt her. And she just kind of lost it. She's like talking about this moment she had. And then the producer's like, tell Cindy that people for a long time had suspected that she's hiding something. They show Cindy scenes where Casey talks about her. It's so sad to watch them watching these old home videos, and they must be thinking, my God, what happened? What went wrong? And I spoke to that earlier, and again, just these home videos they show. And as a parent sitting there in this situation, you're like, how? I mean, again, here's this sweet little girl opening presents on Christmas. How do we end up here? How do we end up where she did this to her child? Let alone fast forward to here. Okay, so Cindy says they don't know who Kaylee's father is, and she reels off a couple of lies that Casey told. Then they show her the scene where Casey says that she was Art at 18, and Cindy's like, what? So this is just talking about all the changing stories with the fathers and whatnot of whoever Kaylee's father was. And again, Cindy's like, I never heard of this, I never heard of that. One thing they agree on is that Casey lies all the time, and that much is clear. I mean, we've seen that as a general public. You don't have to know her personally to know. This is just somebody who lies at no abandon. Like, they'll just lie about anything, zero conscience, they don't care. It could be big, small, indifferent, they're gonna lie. Then they read a text message exchange between Cindy and Casey. Now this is where I'm gonna refer to the pictures of my phone. I took them very quickly, and so we're just gonna read through them. Now I'm gonna start off reading Casey's text to her mother, and it's kind of chopped up here a little bit, but it says, and retrieve my daughter's ashes as well as more of her property and anything else of mine that is still at your house. I will be in town in 2 weeks, so let me know if arrangements can be made. Thank you. And then Cindy responds back, sorry, but there is nothing here for you to pick up. We can ask the sheriff's department to give us the remaining property and go through it together. I'm not parting with her ashes. That's all you gave me of her in the end. I'm not trying to be mean, but that's how I feel. If you can share her last day with me. She starts to type something, and then Casey responds, stay with your murderous, adulterous, arist husband. That's who has the answers, always has and always will. You don't deserve any part of her, and you will never again have a part of me. You choose your husband over both of your grandchild and your children. Biggest mistake of your life. And that's all I have right there. So in the show, Cindy continues to go on. I mean, she's literally saying that, she sent Casey the pictures of the autopsy or the remains and whatnot. She goes in like real hardcore on Casey during this. I mean, you hear the exchange, right? And Casey's like saying some vile things to her. So you see, and this is years ago, right? So you see, this was Casey's MO this whole time. It was Dad's fault. It was Dad's fault. That's the line in the sand. She has some deep hatred towards George. Whether she believes this or not, or if she knows that this will end up as evidence somewhere one day, she's going to keep with that narrative, I don't know. But seeing this, it gave me some insight into Cindy to be like, okay, even though she doesn't seem to be able to accept that, what happened to Kaylee most likely happened at Casey's hands, and not the way that she really thinks, she has these strong opinions towards Casey. I mean, she says, that's all you gave of me were her ashes. I'm not going to give them back to you. That's major for her not to give Casey the ashes, which I agree with her. I mean, but that really tells you what Cindy thinks. Then it continues and it says, Cindy said she'd always said that Casey could have Kaylee's ashes after she passed, but she says now she'll never do that. She'll spread them somewhere before Casey ever gets her hands on them. Very major, very impactful. So then this whole thing happens where the mom, Cindy, says something like, well, whatever Casey is, and the producer's like, what is she? What is Casey? And the mother's like, well, whatever she is. Now, it goes into this whole thing where she's still like, whatever happened to Kaylee, but she still doesn't know what happened 100%. She does believe that Casey knows what happened to her daughter. And then during this conversation Cindy has a panic attack. They have to go into the bedroom. It's George and Cindy, and he's comforting her. She's on the floor. She's about to pass out. She's on medication for PTSD and panic and all this stuff. And this is another one of those moments of seeing their relationship that I was like, they might bicker, they might doing this and that. But these moments where they need someone to be their person looking out, they seem to have each other's backs in this scenario here, which would be of utmost importance. So they request Cindy again for the lie detector thing, and when they ask her like what's the biggest difference, she goes into this whole thing about the situation, about George, thinking that Casey drowned, and that she doesn't know what happened 100%, and that the police department brainwashed him because they tried to do the same thing to her, where they're bringing them in separately and basically trying to say this is what happened, so on and so forth. Now Cindy will say that Casey's attorney brought her into a room, just her without George, and says, Casey wants to tell you what really happened, and that's Kaylee accidentally drowned in the pool, and, tells the mother this. And then he's like, someone's going to have to take the fall for this, and it's going to have to be George. And George says that he told the grand jury that he thought Casey was responsible for Kaylee's death. George says he will go to his grave thinking that, always believing that Casey harmed Kaylee. And honestly, he's right. So there's like this kind of cognitive dissonance, and again, I ain't qualified to give that out, but you know what I'm saying, with the mother going on. Whereas George is more like, okay, this happened or that happened, or, whatever it was, Casey is responsible. This was not an accident. This was not a whatever. Casey is responsible for what happened. And the mom's just trying to hold on to maybe this glimmer of hope that her offspring wouldn't do something like this. I don't know. They show Cindy and George Casey's new theory about what happened to Kaylee. Now, again, this is going back to Casey's documentary. This is when Casey says she came around the corner, her dad's holding Kaylee's wet body, and he says that he's going to make it okay, and she wanted to believe him, and so on and so forth. The parents are in shock, and Cindy says, does this make sense to any rational person? Cindy says both Casey and George knew CPR. And this is the whole thing that throughout all of Casey's documentary that she did, if you just stop and say, does this make sense to a rational person? Any of it along the way, even before she was completely throwing her down in the bus, why, if your child accidentally drowned, would you then take her and hide her in the woods? Other than the obvious not wanting to get caught, right? But I mean, this is where it doesn't make sense. And so then bringing the dad into it, he had, her dripping wet in his arms. He was going to make it okay. I wanted to believe him, so I didn't tell anybody for 30 days. I mean, come on. And now, so when they're listening to this story about Casey talking about that day where she wakes up, she goes outside, she finds Kaylee, in her dad's arms, the producer goes back to that question that we heard earlier, what's the kernel of truth? And the mom says, well, when she wakes up in the morning, she doesn't find the baby. She's distracted and the baby's in the pool, basically has drowned. She then says because Jose Baez put the idea of George taking the phone in her head, that's where she comes up with that part. So again, in the original story, there's a thing about the phone and he's going to make it okay. And so that's where you see Cindy's logic of, well, she gets up and she can't find the baby, so that's true because Casey said that. I wake up, I can't find her. And so Cindy's basically saying like, oh, she accidentally drowned. She finds her in the pool. That's the kernel of truth, or the phone or whatever. So you can see kind of like where Cindy starts to go down the road with it, and then we'll veer off. They then will ask her a bunch of questions about George, telling her something, and she says no to all of them. Now they go back in, they question George again. They ask him, did he conceal the whereabouts of Kaylee? And he struggles with this question. They go back and forth. This is the thing that threw me off with this, because he literally gets so nervous over this. And I was like, dude, you're making me nervous now. Like, why are we getting nervous over this question that literally hinges on everything? Now, eventually, all this will take place. They get the questions, and then they get the results back. So let me read my notes here. They finally get the results. It's very dramatic. Cindy goes first. She passed the questions about George. Did George tell her he knew something? George goes next. He passed the questions about S.A. and the daughters. George's second exam was about involvement in her death, and he passed that exam too. George is very emotional and crying during this. And Cindy's like, I knew it was going to be that way, but you could tell that a little bit of her was like, well, let's just see, because I mean, that's a big question for, the spouse of a person. Like, this could change our entire life again. So, if something comes up. Cindy says she will never forgive Casey, but will always love her. And George says he loves her, but doesn't like her, and what she's put everyone through. And, they kind of wind this out. And so with that, we'll wind this out with some thoughts and whatnot. So here's the thing. I think that there is something up pretty much with the whole family. Okay, now does that mean in a nefarious type way of like they did something or whatever? No. Just like any family has their issues, this family does too, obviously. They just had a spotlight thrust on them because of what Casey did. And what she did was absolutely heinous. I don't believe a word Casey Anthony says. I don't believe any of that. I think she has made it all up. I think that the fact that she will stick with a lie and go and go and go and go, and she picks a very touchy subject dealing with SA and things like that, she's banking on people believing that. I think that with the family, there's obviously going to be this tumultuous thing that goes on. I mean, look at what all happened. So it's not to say that, just this specific family has these issues. I mean, clearly the Casey part is very bad, right? But just some of the things that I saw with like George and Cindy, some of the things over the years, and especially this, it's just, a little bit odd. But again, I don't know how I would be if I lived through that. So my personal opinion, do I think that George had anything to do with it? No, I do not. I question still, which it was killing me that they didn't ask Cindy about the chloroform, Xanax, things, any of these questions that are like dead ringers. And I am sure they had a list of stuff that was like, you cannot ask us A, B, and C. This is specifically about this, right? Because I do question how much Cindy tried to cover up. I do think that, I don't think Cindy had anything to do with the act of it, but I think she was in protect my daughter mode for a bit there, 100%. And I'm sure her and George went, toe to toe, because remember, he was like, yeah, I think she had something to do with it to the grand jury. And he's getting thrown under the bus for doing stuff to her, which it was almost like in order to save your daughter's life, do you want to lose both of them? We're going to have to say A, B, and C. And George, you're getting thrown under the bus for this. And he probably reluctantly went along with it. And now his name has still gotten dragged through the mud. And she's still gone with this narrative. Who knows why she's doing that? I mean, who knows why? If you have ever been around someone that lies in such a way as someone like Casey Anthony, and this is what throws people off, or kind of circling back to that idea, they will lie, I mean, y'all, about every little thing you can imagine and every big thing, and they will stick their guns to it, and it makes a person who doesn't do that believe it, because you just are like, well, why? They've said this for years. It has to be true. Why would they keep saying that? And in this day and age where everybody's like, let everybody out of, jail that's done all these crazy crimes and stuff like that, I mean, it's insane. And so for Casey to get up here talking about, oh, no, dad did this and that, and now we got all these people calling, threatening their lives, they don't see through that. So it makes it very perplexing and confusing. I can get that. But again, for me, do I know what happened to little Kaylee Anthony? No. Do I have an idea? Yes. Was I there? No. Is all this speculation? 100%. My personal opinion is that most likely what happened is that she was being given something to make her go to sleep, Xanax, something, right? Whatever it was. And she was given too much and she lost her life. Casey puts her in the trunk, probably kept her in there for a minute, going out, partying, doing whatever. And then she had to get rid of the remains. And so that's where, and they got rid of the car, everything, right? And did what she did. The fact that she did it a mile and a half or less than a mile, or whatever it was, from the house is jarring to me. And maybe she was trying to plan on being like, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to set up. Like, she kind of had the whole idea for her father to take the fall the whole time. I don't know, right? I'm not in her mind, thank God. And again, these are just little sofa opinions. This is allegedly, none of this is, I don't know this to be factual at all. But I just think something along that line happened. I think throwing everything they could at the wall, mixed in with the SA allegations against the father, seemingly worked on the jury, because really they couldn't sit there and prove without a doubt the fact of what happened. The fact that her poor little remains has stayed out there for so long is probably the only reason why Casey was able to walk, because they couldn't see what happened to her, and she's kind of ridden that out. Probably, I would imagine, Casey needs money, and that's why she made that documentary and said these salacious things to try and save face or whatever. Now, I also found a couple of articles that I was researching, going into or whatever, and again, this is allegedly, how these things are when they're like, we talked to a close friend, but one of them was to the essence of, we talked to a close friend, who says she's just freaking out, she can't believe this, George, he's lying and da-da-da-da-da. Again, if you've ever been around somebody who lies like this, this is what they do. They will double down on something. They will destroy a human being full well knowing that they are making every last bit of it up, and it will become completely convincing to other people, and they will think it's totally true, especially to other people who might be that same way, right? They'll do the same kind of things. They're like, well, here we go. They're just going to run with it without question. So there's that. At the end of the day, this poor little girl lost her life in an atrocious way. She was probably scared to death, didn't know what was going on in those final moments. And then sadly, her own, allegedly, I don't know, her own mother desecrated her remains by putting her in the trunk and then dumping her like garbage. It's disgusting. It's absolutely sad. And to see what it does to the whole family, come on. So anyways, let me know what you think. If you're still watching, well, I greatly appreciate it. I know this is a little bit of a longer video. So let me know what you think. What do you think about the case in general? Do you believe Casey's allegations? Do you not? Everybody can agree to disagree, on some things, right? No harm, no foul. That's what makes the world go round. Just, kind of be nice to each other in the comment section about it. But I'm curious to know, and your reasons why, like what you think, because I'm always open to other things and suggestions and whatnot. So that being said, thank you once again for hanging out on the sofa with little Roscoe, with me, and Coco joined us a few minutes ago because she is barking with her brother out there being a little stinker butt. So anyways, they both asked if you could, probably throw double sofas down in there. Maybe a little love seat too for little Coco. Good Lord. Roscoe takes up the whole sofa. Down in the comment section, and we'll just go on, skip on down there. And until we do skip on down there to talk about this case, we'll see y'all soon.